This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
So Baruch Hashem, we were Zoche to be at Mekoymos Kedoshim, and of all places, Turkey. And someone commented, these travels, it's like when the Chida traveled across Europe. And my reaction was, halavai, it should be in the footsteps of the Chida. But it sort of elicited a curiosity. Did the Chida go to Turkey? And I opened up the Sefer Magal Tov, and sure enough, the Chida records his travels and his trip to Turkey in the year 1756. So the Chida in his Magal Tov, which he records his various travels, he speaks about in his entry to Tishrei, Ches Tishrei, 5517, 1756, he talks about how he gave the Shabbos Shuvah Drasha in Livorno, and then he skips to Sivan, the 26th of Sivan, and he speaks about leaving Livorno with the captain on the boat, Ragusea, with the captain of the ship, Giovanni Casellar, who was an expert captain. And Chida writes that he passed Porto Ferraggio, Piombino, he passed Napoli, Sicilia, and on Wednesday, the fourth day of Tammuz, his boat went in between two volcanoes, one in the north, one in the south, the volcanoes of Stromboli and Gran Cratere. And the Chida continued to travel past the islands of Crete and the archipelago. And finally, he says he saw Karaburun, which I believe is in the Izmir region. And incredibly, on the 14th day of Tammuz, close to noon, they were boarded by a corsair Frances, who is probably one of the pirates of the Maltese Knights Templar of St. John. And the captain went up to him and tried to stop him, but 20 pirates boarded the Chida's trip, and the Chida says he was searched with all kinds of searches, and they kept him and the captain prisoner, and the Chida says it was Shabbos, and he was not even able to eat 2 meals on Shabbos. And he was very distressed because he had given the captain a purse full of teleros, which was a widely minted silver coin, and he had also had in his possession 500 gold ducats, and he had letters from London, which was considered dangerous because of these pirates, who they were always suspicious of people from England. And says the Chida, I recited Vihinayam, the 91st chapter, 91 times. I said Vihinayam, which is Tehillim Parak Tzadi and Tzadi 1, 91 times. I made many Nedarim, and on the 15th day of Tammuz at noon, they allowed us to go back onto our ship, but behold, 20 of them kept their swords drawn, and they kept us on our boat for 6 days, and they stripped us of all of our gold and silver and all of our merchandise. But the Chida says, B'chastei Hashem, he had one small money belt that he was able to procure a large amount of money. Finally, they let us go after 6 days. The Chida thanks the captain, who was able to remain calm and kept his mouth closed for the entire duration. Finally, on the 20th of Tammuz, the Chida says we were able to reach Izmir, and in the evening we were welcomed with great honor, and were able to restore much of the money that we needed. And the Chida writes, and what did I see in Izmir? I saw the tshuvas of Maran. Who's Maran? The Beis Yosef, who spent a significant amount of time in Constantinople. He saw the manuscript of the Avkas Roichel, Shailos Tshuvas Beis Yosef. The Tshuvas of the Beis Yosef is called Avkas Roichel. The Chida said, I saw it in manuscript in Izmir. What else did I see in Izmir? I saw the Shita Mikubetzes of Maran Aaron Lafafa. Now we mentioned that the Knesset Hagdoila and Rav Aaron Lafafa split the duties of chief rabbi after the great reign of Rabbi Yosef Iskafa. They split the duties. Rav Aaron Lafafa was the leader as a dayan in Choshen Mishpat, and the Knesset Hagdoila in Or Chaim and in Yeridea. And the Rav Aaron Lafafa, the Shem Hagdolim, says he saw the Shita Mikubetzes of Rav Aaron Lafafa in Izmir. Well, here is when, this is the exact date that the Chida saw the Shita Mekubetzes. This doesn't mean the Shita Mekubetzes of Rabbi Tzal Ashkenazi, but the same style of writing where he collects the various opinions. This he saw in the city of Izmir. So incredibly, the original Rav of Izmir, Rav Yosef Eskafa, the Rosh Yosef, followed by Knesset Hagdoila, and Rav Aaron Lefafa. Now we're going to see what the Chida saw of the manuscripts of the Knesset Hagdoila. Then the Chida says he traveled, he continued to travel, and on the 4th day of Elul, it was Shabbos, he was in Takir Dag, which was near Istanbul, Constantinople, and finally on the 6th day of Elul, he entered Kosta. Kosta is Constantinople, and he rented a room, and amazingly, he was greeted with great warmth and kavod. Now, the Chida continues his travels on the 27th day of Tishrei. He went to the gate of the officer of the legs, and he saw them bring the elephants, which seems like the Chida visited a zoo. On the 2nd day of Cheshvan, he saw the mosque Nur di Asmaniye, which is near the Grand Bazaar, which we were just at yesterday, on Wednesday. How time flies. So we were just there yesterday. We saw this mosque. Now the mosque is opposite the Hagia Sophia, which we saw yesterday. And according to most poskim, you're allowed to go inside a mosque. But I personally would not go inside. The Kloisenberger Rebbe is in a tshuva writes that one should not go inside of a mosque, although most permit it. Nevertheless, I did not feel comfortable going inside. One would have to remove their shoes, declaring that it's a holy place, something that I did not want to do. But it's interesting, the Chida writes that the Hagia Sophia was a landmark, but interesting, the Chida doesn't say that he went inside, so perhaps the Chida is means to say it is a landmark, but he personally did not go inside. He saw over there other notable buildings, palaces of all kinds of animals that the Chida describes, a palace of leopards, lions, tigers, wolves, elephant heads, crocodile heads, and the Grand Bazaar, which we just saw yesterday. And then, says the Chida, La Havdil, after seeing all of these things, I daven mincha, where? In the Orida synagogue. That's where we davened. We were there, and in that synagogue there is a bima, which is in the shape of a boat. And the Chida writes about the various shuls that he visited in Istanbul, and he saw the cemetery at Igri Kapu, and he davened at the kever of Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi. Leda'avonenu, we searched and searched for the kever of Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, but we were not able to find it. But the Chida, in fact, writes, he did pray at the kever of Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, and, says the Chida, he saw Tshuva's Knesset Hagdoila on Yoredeya and Choshen Mishpat in Istanbul. Also, I saw Kmeos, and the sword that we spoke about yesterday of Rav Naftali Katz, that was made for him by Reb Chaim Abulafia with all kinds of engravings and shemais. The Chida says that I saw that sword, and I saw a sefer by a mamzer who lived with a shivcha to try to be matar himself, and it was very questionable and controversial until the Maram Bet Yosef, the Beis Yosef, and the Radvaz, and the Mabit, and the Alshich all agreed to it. It says the Chida, I saw their personal signatures. Now, says the Chida, Sunday, the 16th of Cheshvan, it was Matzoi Shabbos, Sultan Azman died, and Sultan Mustafa, the son of Sultan Ahmad, immediately became the king. I tried to get a view of the proceedings, and I saw it, and I pronounced the bracha over the king, and the Chida describes in great detail what that procession was like, and the Chida concludes that great gifts were given out to the passerbys, but says the Chida, I went to see this king, to be able to behold that which the Gemara says one should always run to see the kings of Gentiles, so that when we see King Mashiach, we will see the noticeable difference between the grandeur and the majesty of Melech HaMashiach and all other kings. And we could use that as a paradigm for what we saw in Izmir and Constantinople. By the way, the Chida also says he saw the king going and returning from the Gelato Tower, which we also were in that vicinity. But the Chida says the purpose of witnessing all these things, the grandeur, the majesty, the architecture of the nations of the world, is so that we see and recognize that when Hashem brings the Mashiach and He bestows upon Klal Yisrael the royalty that they deserve, we will be able to see how we far surpass all the nations of the world in the bracha that we will receive from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, all of our experiences are only to yearn that if this is the culture and the majesty of the nations of the world, just imagine the great blessing and success and majesty the Rebbeinu Shalom will bestow upon Klal Yisrael. B'bias goyal tzedek v'mheira v'yameinu. Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.